Yes, we are recording at the moment, so that's just commenced. Um, so I'm Pete Sherritt. I'm the program manager for ECDS here at NHS Digital. I'll just go through our speakers and do a brief introduction for them all now. So Bobby, can you just say hi, please?
Hi, yeah, this is Bobby. I work on urgent emergency mental health care at NHS England.
Thanks, Bobby. And Tom?
Hi, good afternoon. Tom Hughes. I'm the ECDS clinical lead. Thanks.
And also we've got Linda.
Hi, I'm Linda Hellett, Programme Manager for NHS Improvement, and I'm supporting the team with the ECDS project.
Great. Okay. So the usual housekeeping stuff. As I said, we are recording. That's for the benefit of others, so you can watch it back later, and anyone who can't make it. If you want to chat, then please do send your questions and comments using the WebEx chat function. Please try and select everyone there, so just like it is shown on the screen there. That just makes sure the questions are visible to us all, so we don't miss any of them. And we've also got the supporting documents all available via the link there. We've got a few links in this slide deck, and we will try and get them online for the end of the week, along with the recording. And we'll send an email out when that's ready. So this afternoon we're going to cover the mental health sequin and the data collection around that in depth. That's what Bob Pratap is here for, and also Tom Hughes. We're going to do a brief update on streaming guidance. I'm afraid we don't have a huge amount to share with you at this stage, but we can update you a little bit on progress with that. We're also talking about the new ISN information standard for ECDS and the enhanced technical output spec, which have now been they're now ready and they're live. Then we're going to have a Q&A session towards the end with any time we've got. We did ask for people to email us any questions, so those will be prioritised. I think we only got a couple, so we'll tackle those ones first, and then we'll go on to a general QA session. And also just a very quick comment about the crib sheets. So for any of you who are sort of relatively new to this, then we have produced and we have professionally made up different crib sheets which cover different aspects of ECDS data recording in the department. So sort of one or two aimed at reception staff, one or two aimed at nursing staff, etc. If you would like a pack of those, they are sort of very high quality. Then please send your postal address to our mailbox there. Sort of name and postal details, and we'll send you a pack. We've got plenty of those still left. And just a quick recap on what we covered from the last webinar. So we covered the fact that the old CDS 10, the old A&E dataset, will be retired from April 2019. The deprecated ECDS codes will not be valid after March 2019. And that's for activity after March 2019. And the chief complaint child codes and new SNOMED content that came in October 2018. So that all the detail on that's in the last webinar. It's recorded, and we do have the slides up there on the website for you to download.
Pete, is there any formal guidance that's going to be going out to every trust saying we are turning this off? Please make sure that you're compliant with this. Is there anything which is going to the CEOs and the CCIOs?
Yeah, I think, yes, that's the plan also. So we've been doing it via our kind of standard routes at the moment, but yes, we'll be employing more and more routes. I mean, we are in direct contact with sites as well. So obviously the ones which are already submitting ECDS, we don't have to worry about. There are still a few sites out there on CDS 10, and we are in direct contact with them. Yeah. Right, okay, so on to the mental health sequin data collection in depth. So I'll just do a very quick intro to this, Bobby and Tom, and then we'll come on to the Tom's and Bobby's part. So really what the objectives of this are, and Bobby will go into much more detail on this, I'm sure. What we're looking to do here really is to understand the true scale of mental health attendances. That's because on an international basis, we are normally there's around about 5% of attendances seem to be related to mental health, whereas in the NHS it's roughly 0.5%, so a tenth of what's being recorded nationally. So if we're getting a little bit of background noise, so if you're not speaking, if you could go on mute, that would be great. Thank you. So we think that's down to the data collection methods that are employed in the NHS. So what we're doing to help with that, we're enhancing the data quality report for ECDS, and we'll explain how you can get that later. So the report for November will be coming out quite soon, I think next week, and that will show the mental health sequence scores, so you can look at your own trust and find out how you're doing. The really good thing about that, the really sort of reassuring thing, is that many sites are getting very, very good scores on that, 99% or greater, with a number of sites hitting 100%. And we have some thoughts on why that may be. We also do see a number of sites, quite a lot, which are getting below 50%. And we think there may be some misinterpretation of the guidance, and also there will be some other factors at play, which we'll cover later on in this presentation. Yeah, we'll help you to understand what you need to do, and some tips on how to do that well. So over to you, Bobby, if that's all right. I'll come on to your slide when you're ready.
Thank you. Just checking you can hear me, first of all.
Yeah, can, Bobby, yeah.
So my phone has been playing up today, so just to warn you, it has been cutting out intermittently. So if it cuts out, it will come back within 30 seconds, but just let me know if you can't hear me at any point. Mm-hmm. Getting on to the first slide then, if possible, please, Peter. Thank you for inviting me on. I just wanted to give a perspective, if you like, of a mental health policy person, and trying to figure out what mental health activity goes on in A&E. Happy for these animations to go up, and I'll sort of talk to them all as and when. But so. I guess from my perspective, I often get asked, how many mental health attendances are there in A&E? How does the 4-hour standard, does the 4-hour standard performance apply to people with mental health needs compared to other people with other sort of attendances? How many 12-hour breaches? What is the impact of a certain community mental health service on reducing A&E attendances? So there's all sorts of really fundamental questions that we would answer through having a good data on A&E mental health attendances. And I'm sure lots of people on this call will be able to correct me on all sorts of some of the assertions I'm about to go through. But as someone who's not particularly technically data literate and savvy, I sort of did some investigation. And so sort of starting from the left of this slide, if you like. So the A&E data set showed 165,000 attendances annually, I believe in 16-17. As Peter alluded to, that was less than 1%. So I presented this slide to a conference of liaison psychiatry clinicians, and they said, absolutely no way, that doesn't sound like enough. And kind of aligns with what Peter said about international evidence, and they felt that 5% probably was more about right and what's showing in their local data sets. So I delved further. So that same data set moving across to the right showed that over a quarter of sort of our large A&Es are reporting zero or reported zero mental health attendances in that data set, which you can imagine the conference of liaison psychiatrists laughed at that thought. I'm sure lots of emergency department staff would find that kind of not particularly credible as well. So then people sort of said, why don't we? So why is that the case? So moving back over to the left, one of the reasons we think was that historically you've had to make a diagnosis in order to identify that it was a mental health attendance. So a mental health diagnosis would have needed to be made during the A&E attendance or somewhere on that patient's record. And then we figured out that actually most mental health attendances to A&E, first of all, you may not see a mental health clinician at all. So an ED kind of nurse or consultant probably wouldn't be making a mental health diagnosis. If you do see a liaison team, it's very likely that it's a nurse that you see, so they wouldn't be making a diagnosis. And even if you see a consultant, it's been mixed answers I get. Some consultants say, yes, we would make a diagnosis. Some say we would never dream of making a diagnosis, a mental health diagnosis in the heat of a 4-hour attendance. So from my perspective, it started to sort of build a picture as to why we might not be seeing some of the data recorded, but also getting quite confusing actually about the different ways in which people sort of identify and record mental health in A&E. Moving to the bottom, a common question people have is, so what about people, one of the most common attendances or some of the most common attendances are people who self-harm when they might not have their mental health kind of condition recorded, when it's primarily a physical health attendance in the first instance, i.e., an overdose or something like that. Or another common example might be an older person who's had a fall, but they might have some mental health needs as well that may not have been typically recorded. Other people have said, why don't we just record, there is a code, apparently there was a code in the old data set called number 35 psychiatric conditions. But then going into that, half of the people I asked said that they use that, or probably much less than half. Lots of people don't use that. So again, not really good enough for counting at a national level. And then finally, some teams think that they were recording it accurately because the liaison psych team say, well, we record everything that we see. Our challenge back to them would be that, but you're only open, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. So are you seeing everyone outside of those hours? And are you actually sure you're seeing everyone that attends even within the hours that you're there? And there is some evidence to show that, I think at least even with a liaison team there, around a quarter of mental health attendances might not be getting referred to them. So I guess that's no good as a robust way of counting mental health attendances. So I guess that was just a quick whistle-stop tour to my confusing exploration into the data and why the previous data sets haven't been able to show us what we need. And I'm sure lots of people are aware of this, but it's useful context as to why the ECDS might actually give us much better hope of being able to capture some of these data. So I'll pause there. Is it better to do Q&A after Peter or to pause now?
We can do them as we go, Bobby,
Yep.
maybe at the end of each slide. I'm not sure we've had any yet. I've not seen any coming through to everyone on the chat.
Well, do we want to go to the next slide and then we'll stop at the end of that and see how we are?
Yeah. Okay. Great. So so setting all those problems aside with the old data set, the ECDS, we are very optimistic that this might give us a much better chance with the way it's set up of capturing mental health activity. And big thanks to Tom and others in the ECDS team that kind of set up the original data set to try and be able to do this. So the proposal that Tom, in fact, on the slide, I think originally came up with was that the premise, I guess, as everyone is probably aware, of the ECDS is that it collects a chief complaint for every attendance rather than a diagnosis. So this gives us a much better chance of people such as receptionist staff, ED nurses who aren't necessarily mental health specialists, being able to kind of capture a behaviour or a symptom or a sign of why someone has turned up, rather than feeling that they have to make a diagnosis. And the codes that the codes are listed here on this slide that are approved for use in the ECDS currently that we believe are the ones that best capture what are mental health chief complaints. Equally, that there is still the ability to record diagnosis for people for whom that can be done in the second list of codes here. And then very importantly, there is the code essentially for a self-harm attendant. So where somebody has attended where the chief complaint may be a different chief complaint, such as a laceration or asphyxiation, but if it transpires that was actually an attempt at self-harm or to take one's own life, there is the ability to record that as with the code listed here as self-inflicted injury. And what we're proposing is that by adding up all the attendances with these fields recorded, these codes recorded, we will then be able to identify which of those attendances are mental health attendances. And finally, just the box with a bit of text on the bottom left, we do recognise that this might not be the perfect list of codes, and there may be tweaks and improvements to be able to add some and maybe remove some of these that some may feel are outdated. But for now, they are the codes that are approved for use in the ECDS, so they are the ones that we have to work with, is my understanding. So I guess that's all from me. I'll pause there. Please do add anything, Tom or anyone, and happy for any discussion or questions.
Great, yeah, thanks, Bobby. So we do have two questions have come in already. One from Jackie Malarkey. Maybe tackle that one first. This maybe comes onto the second, the next slide in a sense. Would receptionists actually record a chief complaint?
So that one's, I'll take that one. So the receptionist would be collecting the injury data. The chief complaint is collected by the first clinical member of staff that assesses the patient, and under normal circumstances that would be a member of nursing staff, but it could be medical.
Thank you. Sorry for any confusion I caused with that there, and thank you for clarifying for me as well there, Tom.
Thank you. Right, okay, excellent. So yeah, the key point there is the chief complaint is a medical thing, so it must be recorded by a member of medical staff. The next one's from John O'Neill there. So medically unexplained symptoms could be part of this.
Yes, so this has come up before. So you'll see in the list on the right-hand side there are somatization, somatoform pain disorder, and dissociative disorder, and if necessary, factitious disorder. And so sometimes the medically unexplained symptoms would be grouped under there, not necessarily as confirmed diagnosis, but as suspected diagnoses. And it's important to point out that ECDS has a means of conveying uncertainty by having suspected diagnosis as well as confirmed diagnosis. The danger with the term medically unexplained symptoms is that it becomes a bucket for patients that people can't or won't decide what might be going on. And we know that if you put in these very vague terms, I know it may sound quite closely specified to a lot of people coming from the psychiatry angle, but if you put these vague terms in, we know that people will choose those for about 35% of all patients based on previous behaviour, and then you end up with a data set that is essentially useless. And so that's why that term hasn't been put in, but it may be that there's a better term that we can use or something that we can migrate to.
Thank you, Tom. Now, Tom, we've had a few other questions coming in, but I wonder if maybe we go to the next slide, talk through
Yeah,
them,
shall we
and then pick
shall we
some of
shall
those
we
up,
carry
because
on with that, and then we'll
yeah,
pick up the questions afterwards.
right, okay. So over to you, Tom. I'll go on to the next slide here.
Okay, so these are a number of points about how the injury data collection has happened, or what the reasoning behind it, and I'll go through these points one by one. And so the first point is about the chief complaint, diagnosis, and injury for all patients. So the reason that in the past then we have had only 0.5% or thereabouts, an order of magnitude wrong about mental health patients, because we know in international comparison data sets, then it's about somewhere between 4 and 5% of mental health patients are ED attendances. So we know that if you don't collect data fully, in other words, you don't define the denominator, you will effectively artificially select for or exclude from your statistics, particularly patients who have are vulnerable patients or disadvantaged in some way. And in that, then one could include mental health patients. They're the difficult patients to record, the homeless patients, patients who don't necessarily speak English as the first language. And we know that those patients, then they have significant health needs. The emergency department often spends a lot of time and energy meeting those health needs. But if we don't record it, then it essentially goes unnoticed, and we cannot press for the resources that we need to meet the needs of these patients. So that's the logic behind having complete data, because unless we understand the whole problem, then we don't know what percentage of that our patient load is represented by that. And so just a quick note about something about the design of the injury data set bit of ECDS, because this has come up. We had a meeting about 3 weeks ago with some of the senior members of the RCEM team. So there's the Royal College of Emergency Medicine. And there was a lot of feedback because people had been struggling with trying to implement the injury data collection. And so, as Peter has said, there's a lot of people who are managing to do this very well, but there's a lot of people who have been really struggling with this. And so the design of the data set is an international design. It's WHO. It's implemented in Canada and Australia, and it's through the European Union. There's a European Union body which has also mandated this. So, in fact, the UK and England in particular has been behind in injury data collection. So the design is international. It's not something that we made up ourselves. What we do know, so having worked as a consultant in Australia, where we had mandatory injury data collection, we found there that having doctors collect this information was very painful. And so this is why in the guidance for ECDS, we specified that it was reception staff would be the best people to collect this information. And that is what we have been doing in my trust for the last 10 plus years. And we've been collecting ECDS by reception staff, and it seems to work very well. But we appreciate that we couldn't mandate, or one of the difficulties with ECDS is that we couldn't mandate this. We could only give advice that it was a good idea for reception staff to collect this information. So there's reasons for this. There's no technical. The injury data is not of a technical or clinical nature, and therefore there's no reason that reception staff can't collect this information. The other issue with them is that if you have a complex IT system, then your turnover for reception staff is very much lower than it is for your clinical staff. And so your reception staff learn to manage the system and learn their way around the system much more quickly. And so that's another reason why the reception staff are great at collecting this data. So we knew that as part of this, then it would be difficult for people who were going to be collecting this data from trying to use medical staff. If you have been using medical staff to collect this data and it hasn't been working, then we strongly urge that you look at using reception staff to do this. And this is supported from a central steer from NHS England, is that as a rule of thumb, then anything we can do to remove burden from clinical staff to support staff is generally a good thing. Is there anything else there that we need to cover, Pete?
So yeah, just looking through them, why don't we had plenty of questions coming in, which is fantastic. So we've had a point there from a question from Lauren Lee. When is this proposed to go live? So maybe you could pick up 2 points, Tom, really. One about the sequin, when the sequin is live, which I believe is it's live and it's been live for a while, but also maybe the ECDS perspective.
So it may be that the question came from someone who's working outside a Type 1 emergency department, because I think the sequin only applies to Type 1 emergency departments. So that may be the confusion. But the injury data has been part of ECDS since the start. The sequin, the mental health sequin, started in April this year.
Great, thank you. And just to be certain there, Bobby, do you want to confirm that this just applies to Type 1, the sequin applies to Type 1 and 2 emergency departments?
I believe it was Type 1 and 2 was my understanding, but I'm happy to be corrected.
Yeah.
And the mental... Sorry, go on.
Well, so Type 2 is generally pediatrics, and so I think it was only adults. So Type 2 is generally pediatrics and ophthalmology, with some dental and one or two women's, I think. So anyway, we can clarify that. But
yeah, we'll update the slides with the questions and the answers to the questions when we put them live later in the week. So we'll make sure we cover that particular point. So hopefully that's helped helped answer your question, Lauren. From Lizzie there. So Lizzie said injury details are not captured by receptionists the way our PAS works. Don't know if there's any response to that one.
So is this Lizzie in Nottingham? Because it depends on your system supplier, and so there's different systems have set their design up in different ways, and I know that most of the major ones have arranged for this either to be collected as by the reception staff or by the clinical staff, and if it's not working with the clinical staff, my suggestion is to ask the system supplier, can you switch this so that it's available for the reception staff? So if it's Lizzie from Nottingham, then you use System C. I know that in Stoke Mandeville, then the System C does have clerical staff collecting this information. So I know that system does support it.
Great, thank you, Tom. Yeah, and it is Lizzie from Nottingham, so she confirmed that there in the chat. Okay, so let's keep moving. Should we tackle one or two more questions, Tom, and then we perhaps
that'd be good.
The slides. So just checking here. It's more of a question about usage of the available data. So from Richard Vokes, can we not merge the A&E data sets with the MHSDS, Mental Health Services data set, to establish the levels of mental health attendances? I believe that was absolutely, yeah. We should be able to do that. Richard, once when the data's come in, I'm sure there are people who are linking that together. I don't know if you know if Bobby, that's something in your area. The analysis of those data sets and linking them.
Yeah. So that has been done in the past, and we would love to continue to do that with to link the ECDS and the MHSDS in the future. What that tells us is people who attend an A&E who have previously been in contact with mental health services and have a mental health record. But there are, of course, many people who haven't been in contact with mental health services, so it wouldn't give us that information. So, yes, it's really valuable, but it's not the answer to tell us kind of how many mental health attendances there are to A&E. That makes sense.
Yeah, it does, Bobby, yes. Moving on to the next one then. So this is from UHNM to everyone. How would you suggest mandating a system whereby only a clinician can record the chief complaint? So that was picking up one of our earlier points there. How can we... is this I think it maybe is asking about how the IT system can say perhaps restrict the chief complaint only to a medical person?
So this is really an operational and workflow design issue. I think this will actually be picked up in some of the streaming guidance that is coming, because the first point of contact from a clinical point of view will be the member of staff who's doing streaming, who will generally be a senior nurse.
Okay, so it's more of a process thing rather than necessarily the IT system, although maybe there are things that the IT system could do.
Correct.
Mainly around setup of who does what within the system. Right. Okay. So we've got a little bit of background noise. I'm not sure if it's coming on from one of our people, but if you go on mute, that would be great. So Tom, did you want to pick up the bit about presenting the options well and not trying to put all the options on one page?
So this really goes back to the design of the IT, and so we know that some IT suppliers do have systems that are not very user friendly, and we have been working with them to try and make this better. But we're well aware that we've got to work with what we've got, and for that reason, again, wherever possible, if reception staff, if people who are using this know their way around the system, then that makes it much quicker for them to deal with. If you've got staff, so medical staff who change every 3-4 months, and you have to retrain them, then by the time they get to learn how to use the system, they're moving on, and so that always creates a much higher burden to the clinical staff. So it's trying to design out the problems as much as possible. We realize there is an overhead to collect this information. It's only about 25% of patients that have injuries, and so it's 25% of the patients going through. And in a well-constructed IT system, or even a moderately constructed IT system, it should take about 30 seconds per patient.
Yeah, so if the interface is good, about 30 seconds is pretty reasonable
to
expect.
There's someone called Ben DiMambro, who's, I think that's where the noise is coming from.
Right.
Ben?
Saeed, are you able to mute people who are not part of the presentation team? Thank you. So, yeah, well, let's keep going then. So, picking up the injury flags point, Tom, one of the things that we are aware of is some of the systems we know definitely do have the injury flags. The systems can pick up the injury flags, and if we're recording an injury, it will ensure that the injury intent is recorded, because the key thing about the injury intent is the thing which is going to be scored via the data quality report. So it'll give you a percentage out of 100 of a score out of 100 for whether you're recording the injury intent for every injury. We know that some systems do that, but obviously the system has to have that functionality for you to be able to load them on, and obviously keep them updated as well as we release every 6 months, refresh the ECDS, the actual data set itself. The system should be able to tell you either via the interface or perhaps by some reports which you can go back and capture and go back and identify any problem records. The system should be able to really help you with that. That's the kind of thing which an IT system is very good at. And we so really based upon this, hopefully this has prompted a few people to maybe check their system. Maybe the system's capable of it, but it hasn't been actually configured. Maybe the injury flags aren't loaded onto your system. So that's one to have a look into in detail. Check how your system works, and obviously get in touch with your IT supplier if necessary.
So just
Tom,
to
anything else
explain,
on that one? Yep.
yeah. So just to explain, because not everyone may understand what we mean by the injury flags. So in the chief complaint and also in the diagnosis codes, each of those has an injury flag, which is a 1 or a 0. And if it's a 1, then for that patient, then the injury data needs to be completed. And that covers injuries and poisoning, because poisoning in public health point of view is also a form of trauma. And so that's why it's constructed in that way. It's to try and make it easy for IT suppliers to build this into the workflow. And so we know that many of them do, because in other jurisdictions, then compulsory data, completion of this injury data is routine.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find those in, as Tom says there, in the enhanced technical output specification, which we'll come to in a minute, and we'll show you all the links for that. So that is live now, the new version of that. And I'll just pick up one of the questions which came in from Paul Jessup there in Hull and East Yorkshire. He's questioning whether the injury flags are available in the TRUD downloads. If not, can they be? At the moment, Paul, no, unfortunately. The only place we can put those is in the enhanced technical output spec. But we are looking at ways that we can enhance the TRUD downloads so that it can contain much more richness of data than it currently holds. So yeah, we are looking into that, but at the moment, unfortunately not, I'm afraid.
So just to clarify that under the new system of the ECDS data, then the TRUD and the technical output spec are produced by the same process, and so there will be one-to-one matching, and therefore you will just be able to load up the TRUD and then do a join to the technical output spec information.
Yep, that's right, absolutely. So the next slide really was, I'll move on to it, we're talking about there just what are your challenges, what is working well. I think we'll probably glean some info on that if we carry on. We've got a few questions to go through, so we may start to run short on time, but if we give it maybe another 5 or 10 minutes, I think we're okay for time, bearing in mind the rest of the slides. So from Sharida Collins, Chief Complaint, would the behaviour codes listed here also allow us to understand why the behaviour was unusual, agitated or violent, for example, mental health disorder or drug or alcohol abuse? Could we use Chief Complaint and mental health diagnosis? And I think that sounds like a kind of an analysis type question. Tom, do you want to pick that one up?
Yes, so the Chief Complaint codes, again, we didn't develop them in-house. The Chief Complaint codes were developed by the Canadians, and this is part of their Canadian triage assessment. And so these are robust codes because they've had 20 years of use, and so we know that they are robust in clinical practice. However, we are aware that sometimes then they may not be precisely matched for how we might want to express clinical illness in a UK context. And so some of these, with input from Bobby's team, then we have changed them slightly and subtly because they have some terms that they thought could be better explained in a UK context. So it may be that some of the terms will change over time. When it comes to analysis, then yes, you can group all these together. When the alcohol, if there's an injury or a poisoning element to the attendance, then this would be picked up in the alcohol and drug section of the injury monitoring. And so we should be able to collect a complete picture. And this is because if you think about the nature of injuries, whether it's a wound or an overdose, then these can occur for many reasons. So yes, it might be self-harm, but often it's intentional. It's unintentional, or might be an assault, or it might be inadvertent. An elderly person might take an overdose because they're forgetful, or a young child might take an overdose because they're exploring their environment and they're 2 years old. So the issue is that many of the diagnoses within ECDS might have many different injury potential causes, and that's why it's structured in the way it is.
Great, very thorough answer. Cheers, Tom. So next question's from AB. How does any of this align with the core clinical aims of the sequin? Bobby, perhaps you could pick that one.
Yeah, so the sequin, I guess, is kind of a dual sequin. So there is an element that is about frequent attenders and trying to improve the care provided to them, and then separately trying to improve the data that's collected in the ECDS. So they are separate, but of course they are very linked. So the lack of good data has really hampered our ability to deliver good clinical care for mental health, people with mental health needs in A&E. So just an obvious, I could give you hundreds of examples, but an obvious example that I come across daily are commissioners who, for example, who say, we've only got 2 mental health attendances overnight. We can't justify a liaison team being there overnight. And just down the road, with a very similar population, they say that their A&E is really busy with mental health attendances overnight, and the liaison team is busy. And we don't know if that is just down to the data that Commissioner 1 had, for example, and therefore they don't have a mental health team in place because their data doesn't show them. And there are many other. I mean, I think it's kind of fairly well rehearsed that having good, robust data is absolutely central to delivery of any clinical care.
Great, thank you, Bobby. Now, what I'm going to do, just because with an eye on the clock, we'll run till the whole webinar until 3:30 or maybe slightly over. But I'll be slightly selective now about the questions that we do, and then hopefully we will be able to get through them all by the end. Because we've got a few around the mental health legal status, etc. But I'll just do be a little bit selective for the next couple of minutes, and then we'll move on. We'll do the rest of the presentation, and then we will try and pick up all the questions in order as we go. So I want to pick up the one from Jackie Malarkey. Can you record more than one chief complaint? So maybe patients presenting to ED would be for the actual attendance reason, might be a wound, but it may be because of self-harm, which would be a mental health issue. How would you record both? So yeah, absolutely, Jackie. So the chief complaint, there is a chief complaint in there which does cover self-harm, but it depends really. You should follow the guidance for what the chief had to fill out the chief complaint. So it's what's the main reason. So if the self-harm is particular sort of physical injury, you probably pick that up there, and then in the injury section you can pick up the injury intent. So that's the precise purpose of the injury intent, is that because you can only record one chief complaint. That's really important. It's the primary one. You can only have one of them. That if that chief complaint is not self-harm, you can still record self-harm via the injury intent field. So I hope that's answered your question there. A comment from Birgit here. This will work really well for pediatrics. Is the plan to include children and adolescents? I'm not sure, Tom or Bobby, who wants to pick that one up.
I don't think they're covered in the sequin. However, the ECDS form of capturing this data should apply to all of those patients. I don't know if Bobby wants to say anything.
No, yeah. So just on that, so I think there isn't. The sequin does cover, or it doesn't sort of exclude children and young people. So yeah. So if for example there are different attendance codes, or different chief complaint codes or diagnoses that anyone feels would be more applicable or not applicable for children and young people, please do flag if it's related to mental health. But I'm not aware of any exclusion for the ECDS, and certainly not in the sequin for children and young people.
Okay, thanks, Bobby. So I've got a couple of I think really important ones now as well. So one's from Lizzie here. Perhaps Tom, you can pick this one up. So there are issues around domestic violence and patient privacy when recording some of the options within injury. And there's also one which is a little bit further down from Andrew Smith, which is kind of similar. Often the injury intent only emerges at the end of clinical assessment. So should receptionists be informed so they can update it? And what are the mechanisms for this?
So I'll take the second one first. Is in an ideal system, the reception staff would collect the injury data at the front of the process, and the injury data remains part of the record and is able to be reviewed and checked. And the person who's completing the record on the patient's discharge would be able to check and amend when they were pressing the button to print the patient letter or to send the patient letter to the GP. So that's how it should work in an ideal world. If you can't do that, then I think we take it as a best effort, in that if the reception staff at the start of the patient's journey make an assessment that this is what's happened based on the best information at that time, then that's what we run with. And the other question.
The other question was around domestic violence and patient privacy.
So there are specific rules about sensitive patient data, and so those can be collected when that data is transmitted to SAS and NHS Digital. It is so those particular data items are removed at that point, and so they wouldn't appear in any analysis subsequent to that. And we probably ought to document better how this happens, but there is a specific process that we had to go through for the Information Standards Notice, which described this sensitive data, and it also applies to other things like certain sexually transmitted diseases and also conditions related to assisted conception.
I wonder as well, Tom, if it's more about maybe if the patient's at reception, perhaps with maybe the abuser, it would be quite difficult to, for the patient to get that information across, for example.
So this is again why, in an ideal world, what you have is the best effort at getting that information at the start of the patient journey. If in that particular situation, if there's things which occur or things which come to light during the patient's stay in the ED, and this is quite common with child safeguarding issues, then those would be documented in the clinical notes, but also the safeguarding element of ECDS will pick this up at the end. So that's the point at which one would express these concerns and flag these for follow-up.
Great. Okay, so we have still got lots of great questions to go on this one, but I'd like to move on, as I said we would. Just to wrap this particular section up then, we've mentioned the ECDS Data Quality Report. This is a quick snapshot of it. So it reports on the validity of key data items within ECDS, so we pick up diagnosis, chief complaint, acuity, and others, and it's growing all the time. We are continually developing it. As I said, the next report, which will be published on or before the 13th of November, so that's next week, will include the injury intent data item, plus the notes on how that is calculated so that you can locally make your own calculations before waiting for this report. So here's a snapshot of what it actually looks like, and here's how you can get it. If you're not aware of it, you just have to register there. So it's published via the following link, and this is where you can register for access. So if that is of interest to you, obviously, hopefully it should be after this, particularly for the 13th of November report, and subsequently, then please do register via that link there. So a quick update then on streaming guidance. Now, Linda, would you like to just handle the whole slide on this one? Linda, you still there?
Hi, Pete. Sorry about that. Having some technical issues here. Yeah, thanks for that. I'll just give a brief overview of where we are in streaming. So, unfortunately, not too much to update. But in response to the questions that have been coming through, an example of some of those questions are around the streaming processes and how it maps to ECDS and vice versa, and its issues around the 4-hour target and how they should be recorded, multiple counting for patients that are streamed to the UTC or other care settings, and counting for the daily sit rep. So we're kind of getting lots of questions around that kind of thing coming through. So for us to address this effectively, a working group has been set up. The working group consists of a multidisciplinary team to now a full system approach to the solutions to this. So just to update everybody, we had a meeting yesterday, and the group have committed to developing the streaming guidance, which will provide clarity at local levels, regional levels and national levels. And part of that work is going to be to develop the principles of streaming and develop the guidance around this. They've committed themselves to some quite tight timescales, and with completion due for April 2019. I think Pete has set up a poll, actually. Yeah, he's put it there in front of us. So what would be really helpful for us today, if you could complete the poll. I think there's only 3 questions there, is that right? That would help us to progress some of the work. And it's just an assurance to people, really, that as the work is ongoing, it will be tested with some acute providers and some IT suppliers as well. We need to ensure, obviously, that it aligns to the operational guidance prior to full rollout. So it's just to update everybody that work is ongoing. Please continue to give us your questions that we can input to those groups. And if you can participate in the poll, that would be really helpful. Tom, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, really, just to say, we realise it's been very frustrating for a lot of people not having clear guidance about how streaming should be captured. And all the way through, we've tried to do what we can, and I think it's very helpful that NHSE has picked this up and is going to clarify this. And so we've put in all the information that we have previously put out the comms, and we've explained that the way this is communicated is very important. So it's unambiguous, so that when people are talking to their system suppliers, they know exactly what they've got to ask for. The other side of it is that we need to be very clear about what is streaming and what is not streaming. And so we're looking to get some very clear guidance about the basics of this out in probably 2-3 weeks, so that we can, that's the very first thing that we can do. The more detailed guidance may well be well into next year.
We've had one question about streaming from Catherine Cockfield. Is this for Type 3 A&E? So streaming really covers all the Type 1, 2 and 3 A&E, not EDs. and yeah, it can kind of go either way. Generally, it's from perhaps the type 1 to the type 3, but it can go the other way as well. What the guidance will show is the number of different scenarios. So we initially presented this several months ago, really, the kind of key scenarios, but there are a number of different models out there, and we're becoming more aware of all the different models and the types of nuances that happen, and that's what the guidance will pick up. So Jackie, thank you for your last question. We'll build that one in. We've captured it there now, so that one will also go into the mix of things which need answering, rather than particularly spending a lot of time on streaming now. And Lizzie, yeah, absolutely, the one about 4 hour, yeah, we'll pick that one up. So yeah, and from Peter, indeed there have been, for Peter Barr there have been previous webinars on streaming with scenarios presented. Is this guidance still relevant? Yeah, mostly yes, but it's a little. I think the best thing to do really is to wait for the new guidance to come out, because we'll be able to capture it in a lot more detail and pick up sort of operational issues that might result from that guidance. So yeah, pinch of salt with that one at the moment, I think is probably the right answer. Okay, so if we're okay, we only intended to do a couple of minutes on streaming to allow a little bit of more time for QA at the end. So I'll press on. Thank you, Linda, for that.
Thanks, Pete.
So an update really on now the ECDS information standard. So last webinar, our apologies, we called it version 2 of the information standard. That was a sort of more of an internal thing, and in a sense it is version 2 of the information standard, but the official title of that is ECDS CDS version 6.2.2. So the 6.2.2 there is the really important bit. So the ISN has now been released. That went live at about 1 p.m. so 2 hours ago, and the documents there, so that includes the new XML schema. They're all now via the link there, which you, well, obviously you can't follow that from your screens, unfortunately. But that you I don't know, you should probably be able to Google it. Let me think about how we get that. So maybe I'll just put the link on screen for you towards the end of the webinar. Actually, what I'll probably just do, put it in the chat there for everybody, the actual live link there. But I'll just show you. Hopefully this will work now. Tested this earlier. So yeah, okay. So let me just copy that link. I'll pop it in the chat to everybody. And good. Right, that looks like it's worked for me. Yeah, so just scrolling down there, all the usual stuff there to do with an information standard, including the schema. So as we said last time, the implementation period begins tomorrow, really, or sorry, on the 9th, well, tomorrow or the 9th, to the end of March 2019. The conformance date there is from the 1st of April 2019, but we encourage you to go live as soon as you can, really, with the new standard. The new XML schema is the main part of that, really. And the previous ISN dates still apply. So if you're not going to implement your the 6.2.2 version of ECDS, doesn't mean that you don't have to do anything in the meantime. So you're still being measured on your commencement date for any version of ECDS. Just to be very clear on that, it doesn't mean that suddenly it's okay to wait until March to start submitting. And Lizzie will answer your question, I think, on the next slide or the next one after that. So just a quick recap from the difference between the technical output spec, the TOS, versus the enhanced technical output spec. So we don't contain the SNOMED codes in the web page version here, which you'll see version 2.0 down there. That doesn't contain the actual, that's more like the structure of the dataset rather than the SNOMED codes themselves. But you can get the full list of SNOMED concepts, including all the things that we mentioned earlier, like the flags and various other things. They're all in the separately published Enhanced Technical Output spec, which is now published here. And if I click on this, It was working earlier, and it still works, which is very good. So that's up there as well. I'll pop that one in the chat as well. Going back to my slides. So, oh no, I missed something in my presentation. I'm very sorry about this. The ECDS SNOMED codes from the October 2018 release, I've put submitted from midnight. Apologies, that should be saying midnight next Wednesday. Apologies for that. We'll correct that when the slides go out. So that should say midnight next Wednesday, the 14th of November. My mistake there. So we've also put a quick summary of the different versions of the TOS down here as well, because we've never had kind of 3 different assets live at the same time, so we just wanted to try and help clarify that. So you can see here the different versions of the TOS. They align with different schema versions or different versions of the actual information standard. So you can see everything up to 1.5.2. Which you can still get hold of, aligns with the previous version, 6.2.1. That's the original version of the ECDS information standard, and everything after from today, 2.0 and 2.0.0 aligns with the new version, which is 6.2.2. And we've also put this column here which tells you which SNOMED content the individual technical output spec aligns with. So all of the ones which are currently available, 2.0.0 and 1.5.2, which contain SNOMED codes, they align with the October 2018. So it's the very latest release you can get hold of. Previous ones would have covered different versions of SNOMED content. And as we said just up there, the 2.0 on the ISN page does not contain any SNOMED content, so you'll need to go to the enhanced version for that. So one here regarding the new ECDS schema, because that's one of the sort of main technical changes that we're making here. So we're still working out. SUS has got a backlog of development that it needs to make. So the date currently is TBC when SUS Plus will be able to handle the old and the new schemas simultaneously. So that doesn't mean that when we switch on the new schema, you suddenly won't be able to submit the old one. There'll be a period of dual running up until the end of March where you'll be able to submit either schema, and SUS will be able to cope with that. We will confirm when that is. We know it will be before Christmas, and we'll send out further comms when that's ready. So please don't try and submit the new schema before you've had those comms. So in terms of assurance of any accredited XML suppliers, hopefully, I'm sure we've got some suppliers on the call or listening to this as a recording. We're doing very light touch really for the assurance of this because of the level of change is quite minor. So Emma Bell from the Solutions Assurance team will be getting in touch with you, or she may already have been in touch with you, to schedule a short conference call, and essentially the types of things that she'll be covering will be fairly include and possibly limited to confirming that the same activity won't be sent in both versions, for example, which is one of our golden rules, obviously. We'll ask you to confirm that you'll be validating against the new schema before actually submitting, and submitting a test file, which we'll check. One thing which we've confirmed is that there won't be any submission of the WESIX file. For those of you who've been involved in that assurance process, it's a little bit more laborious, but we won't be requiring that. Yes, and from Andy, yes, there is a summary of differences. That is available, sorry, wrong page. That's in the change specification. It's got a summary, and also in the technical output spec version 2.0. I think the change specification is the initial place to go for that. That should summarize it quite nicely. There's also, Andy, a webinar that we ran on the 26th of September, I think it was, covers those on the slides for that as well. So Lizzie, I think that picks up your comment about when the SNOMED codes will be valid for submission to SUS. So you can submit them. It won't really cause anything disastrous to go wrong if you do submit the new October codes straight away. If you're already using them, it's not it's not really causing any huge problems, but they will be at the moment. They will be flagged as invalid because we've not made those that reference data update onto SUS yet. So as I say, for submitting the new codes from midnight next Wednesday. We'll also send some comms out just to confirm that that's all gone ahead okay. So yeah, key points. The ISN is available now. The old ETOS 1.5.2, which covers the old structure, the previous structure, but containing the new SNOMED, that's available now. On the same page as the TOS 2.0.0, which covers the new structure and also the most latest content. All the TRUD machine and human readable files are available. They've been available for several weeks now. The mappings to data dictionary, that's also available. That's on a different page there. I'll just pop that one in there. That's under the ECDS user guidance page. Okay, if you want to pick that up. And yeah, we'll make announcements when all that everything is ready from the SUS side to start submitting. Okay, anybody from my team want to say anything about any of that? Okay.
So, I mean, just to emphasise the fact that the delta between 1.5.2 and 2.0 is very limited, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's pretty limited. Yeah, the slides from the previous webinar have got a slide listing those. Yeah, we change a couple of fields, which it's a part of the Q&A actually. We've asked people asking about the mental health legal status. For the start date and the end date of those. So yeah, one of the changes there is that changes from a mandatory field to required for those start and end dates because of certain cases where they're not known. Yeah, and there's a few other. I won't try and do them off the top of my head here because that would not be very good. We've had a question really just about this one, so I'm going to paste this link into the chat as well. So this is where you can register for the DQ report. Pop that one in there. Yeah, and what I think we'll try and do now is go back to where we were. So apologies. That will just give me a minute to bear with me on figuring out the next question that we haven't answered yet. We'll go to probably about 3:30. On this. So there was one here from Ben Taylor, which was quite interesting. So this question is, if physical conditions have been recorded as a priority for mental health attendances, mental health patients, so the chief complaint and the diagnosis 1 and diagnosis 2, if they all used up physical conditions, the mental health indicators will be missed. How would you advise capturing the mental health data in such cases? So what that sounds like to me, Ben, is that the diagnosis 1 and 2 is limiting you within your system. So perhaps it only allows you put in 2 diagnoses as a maximum. I think we'd advise that should not be the case. You should be allowed to enter as many diagnoses as are required. You know, as the patient has, they could have many. It does happen. And there's no reason why in ECDS you can't do that. So the ECDS doesn't, I don't think it has a limit on the number of diagnoses that you can actually submit. So that's a key one. So you should be able to, so if that sounds like perhaps a limitation on the front end of your system, which is constraining you there rather than ECDS itself. So that's an important one. But we can only have one chief complaint. So I think one of the other questions picked up that actually what we would do if the chief complaint was more of a physical chief complaint in terms of mental health data. If one of the diagnoses picks up one of the mental health values which we previously covered, then that will count as mental health, and also injury intent will tell us. Yeah, Tom.
That's so essentially it's the injury intent, because if you have a patient who has taken an overdose or a patient who has a self-harmed and has got a wound, then the wound will be the diagnosis. But because the wound has an injury flag, then in a well set up IT system, then that should generate, it should then open the injury dialog box, and that information is input at that point.
That's right, yeah. Similar question here from LJazz. So where a single patient has more than one injury diagnosis recorded, presumably the injury intent is required for each diagnosis.
No.
Yeah.
Look, there comes a point where you say, well, yes, it would be lovely, but that would just be confusing. So I can completely understand how it would be nice to collect that data, but there is a burden on this to the people who are collecting it, and so what we have. I think the guidance, and we might want to check this, but what it says is the highest level diagnosis or the main diagnosis, then it's what is the injury mechanism for that, because you could have someone who's been punched and then has, I don't know, fallen under a vehicle or something like that. And so it's what is essentially the root cause. So in this particular one, it would be the assault.
Yeah, so the second part of Eljazz's question there was about the numerator and denominator. So the answer to that is that there would only be one. It would only be counted as one thing because we're only going to be recording the injury intent once as a maximum for that particular record. Right, now there's one a little bit higher up there from David Foreman Cummings, which is, please outline the process which will lead to have the repeating fields populated based on a patient's attendance, where you are asking for the start date, start time, and the legal status classification code. So going off memory, unfortunately, here regarding the spec, but I'm pretty sure that we can only have one entry for the legal status, the whole legal status segment. Tom, perhaps I should just check that.
So this is the patients who are detained under the Mental Health Act, and so I've just seen there's another question has just come in from Karen Hoffmeyer. Saying, will Section 136 and community orders be included under ECDS? So this all relates to the Mental Health Act entry into ECDS. Now, the original purpose of this was solely to pick up Section 136s because these are patients who are brought to the emergency department under the Section 136 of the Mental Health Act, and but we were told, no, you need to collect all this data. And so it's good because it now picks up patients who may be brought to the ED who are, for instance, under a Section 3. And now we've tidied up the bit about the start date and end date not being compulsory, then hopefully that will aid some of the people's entering this data in at the front line. So in answer to the 136 question, then yes, that is definitely included as part of that. Pete, have you managed to look up that other question?
It is. I've got it on screen actually, yes. So I've loaded up the TOS off the website there, and if we go to the mental health tab, it tells us actually that group can repeat as many times as you wish. And the particular fields in question, this is where there is a change, is that the mandatory nature of the start date and the start time here have been changed from mandatory to required. Yeah, so if you don't know them, then you can not put them in. Yeah, okay, so hopefully that's answered your question, David. I hope it has. If not, let us know. Moving down then, so I think we've answered that one. Lizzie has made a comment there, going back to the chief complaint. That's always been the actual injuries, that's the immediate need. Mental health would be underlying cause, held only in injury details or diagnosis. So that's how they do it at Nottingham. Okay, we're doing quite well now. So, question from, or comment, I think, or question/comment from Zoe. Will this be, Zoe Boys, will this be sensitive enough to link to the IAPT LTC services, i.e. identify where an exacerbation of an LTC has led to the A&E attendance but has been prompted by anxiety? Tom or Bobby?
It's Bobby here. I can possibly take that a bit. So I think that in terms of data sets, that comes back to the suggestion earlier of being able to link data sets. So, for example, if somebody attends with a long-term condition, but we can see in the mental health services data set that they've got a history of anxiety, that could provide useful information. But I think that what is the real value of liaison teams in acute hospitals, because they are the chance of identifying anxiety or underlying mental health.
Okay, we're losing you a bit there, Bobby. I think you've got that.
I think
cutting out probably.
so.
Yeah.
Yeah, to pick up what Bobby was about to say, because this is something that we have certainly noticed, is that you quite often will pick up a pattern of attendance with a patient who maybe presents with some physical or possible physical ailments like chest pain, or but has repeated attendances and for which no physical causes is found. And then if you then flag those and investigate them a bit further, then in fact they have got an underlying possible anxiety issue, and that's a way of picking these up. So I think we're really at the start of a journey where we will be able to get a bit smarter, and we will be able to recognize certain patterns of attendance and for what are nominally physical complaints, but actually this may have an underlying psychological or psychiatric component which is amenable to treatment. So I think this will develop in future.
Great, thanks, Tom.
Don't know if Bobby's.
I'm not sure if Bobby, but what we can do, we can make sure that when we respond to we'll enhance the slides to cover off any questions and answers. So we'll make sure we get Bobby's thoughts on that one as well. Yeah. Right, on to a slightly different topic now from LH. What is the drop dead date for type 1 urgent care, and what is going to happen if trusts are unable to make this date if their IT systems are not compliant? So the best thing to do for a full answer on that one, LH, is to go back to the last webinar, which was late September there. We've covered that one. But yeah, in terms of drop dead date, then there are a few different ways to answer that one. Obviously, you're the key recipient for this data who you should be speaking to, and I've already have a very thorough conversation about this with is your commissioner or commissioners in terms of that, to ensure that they're fully briefed on the situation. We covered the switch off of the old version of CDS, so that will take place in stages, and again the previous webinar does cover that in more detail, but the brief answer is that for activity dated after the end of March 2019, essentially that data will be stored on SUS, and it will be extractable by yourselves, and it will be extractable by the distro, but it won't be valid for it won't be valid for other purposes, so it won't count for HES, for example. So you will drop off HES, and that's the kind of main thing there. So yep, absolutely. IT systems being compliant is a key one to press there. We've had a couple of comments from people saying that we've clarified things for them there. I think the next one is from Mandy Haynes. We hopefully cover this one, Mandy, and we will do this when we update the slides. It's about type 1 and type 3 attendances. So should we just be looking, if we've got type 1 and type 3, should we only be looking at type 1 for the sequin? and we'll cover that one when we update. We'll make sure we're absolutely clear, because your comment there, Mandy, is that this does not appear anywhere in the Sequin documentation. So we'll make sure we clarify that one when we go out with the comms here. From Kevin, similar question to the one posted by LH. The supplier's delayed implementation of the IT upgrade. That's pushed back to late March 2019. Therefore, this element of the Sequin is out of our control but potentially penalised. Yeah, I'm not sure we can say any more on that one, Kevin. Unfortunately, that would definitely be a conversation with the Commissioner. Right. From Gary Woodward. Okay. Does the Mental Health Act legal status section of ECDS have any relevance to this? So, yeah, we covered that a couple of minutes ago in a sense. Yeah, it's part of ECDS. However, it's not formally part of the Sequin, but it is part of the ECDS data set. Yeah. From Keith. You can't log into SharePoint. How can I get a copy of the report? I'm not sure, Keith. I'll have a chat with the team involved on that one. Yeah. Okay, the one from Jackie Malarkey there about patients who need intervention for, say, a cardiac condition. What we'll do, we'll play that one into the general conversation regarding the streaming guidance. Similarly, the one below from Lizzie there about streaming and the 4-hour standard, etc. Okay. Rebecca, sharing the slides. Yeah, we'll have them up ASAP. We need to put in the Q&A that we've done into them, so we'll aim to do that tomorrow, and we'll aim to have the slides up online by the end of the week. So hopefully that's going to be okay. Oh yeah, Neil actually. Neil was reading those questions earlier. So Neil Clark, who's on the data quality team, leads the data quality team. If anyone is still unable to access the SharePoint site to download the DQ report, please email inputdq@nhs.net to request a copy, and we'll send one out. So that one's there in the chat for you there. It's the actual email that you need. I'm just looking through if anyone haven't answered. Oh, safe. Okay, from Gary Badman. Some fields in ECDS are mandatory and some are required, so what's the difference? Right, okay, so I've happen to have the technical output spec here. Let me see now. This should be in. Where is it? Is it in the guidance, or is it in the other one? Bear with me a second. Where do we cover that one? I think it's in here. Should know this. Yeah, here we go. Right, so in the document guidance tab here within the technical output spec, we clarify these, and in fact each of those will link to the data dictionary for the kind of full explanation. But yeah, mandatory means the item must be reported, so the actual interchange will be rejected if you don't submit that item. Required, again, it should be reported, so where it applies, so there are some items which you've got to send if you have the data, but they don't apply in every single case. And optional is, well, optional. Yeah, so that's the place to go for that. From Dave Forrest, attendance disposal. As a CCG and the receiver of the data, we're struggling to understand how the backward compatibility is working for our local provider. Can you advise how who we should liaise with? Yeah, I'm happy to pick that one up, Dave. If you want to maybe drop me a note, and I can maybe help you work through that one.
So I'm not sure I completely understand the question, but one of the issues in the previous discharge data, is it talking about how when a patient is discharged, what is communicated at that point? Is that what you
I
understand?
think it's a mapping question, Tom. Yeah. So
Right.
how the ECDS fields kind of play through to the old version of discharge destination. Yeah.
Okay. So the reason was that in the previous version, then there were three separate concepts which were all mashed together, and in ECDS we've separated those, which is basically, is this a complete episode? So that's your status. Your discharge destination is whether the patient went home or was admitted somewhere, and then the follow-up. So who's responsible for ongoing care? So we've separated those out. But I appreciate, when we did this, it was it took us quite a long time to work out what to do. And so yes, we can help talk you through how those might map together. But it would be helpful to understand a specific question so that we can answer it, because it may be that other people have issues as well.
Great. Yep. Thanks, Tom. The next one's from Karen Hoffmeyer. Will Section 136 and...
No, I answered that one.
Oh, sorry, Tom. Sorry. Apologies.
That was with the mental health.
Yeah, you already did that one, didn't you? Yeah. Sorry. Okay. Catherine Burns around streaming. We'll play that one into the streaming rather than answering it now, Catherine. From Michael Olive. We use System 1 for our MIU patients. TPP have only supplied functionality for a bulk CDS extract. We only use net. TPP will not provide net. Has anyone else got this problem? We are commissioned to send net and have done for many years. We send type 1 and 2 ED net through EMIS from our PAS. So it sounds like, Michael, you're asking for anyone else who's got the same issue, and looks like Jackie's responded there in the chat. Apologies, I'm not keeping up with that. Sue Baxter, yes, we'll share the slides. As I say, we'll get them up by the end of the week. Andrew, I'm not sure if you're triaging these. If there's any you think we should be picking up now. From Joe Thompson, I think, is consultation tier. Right, okay. Joe Thompson, we're having issues getting the ECDS extract from System 1. Errors relating to the consultation tier are preventing it from running correctly, despite TPP issuing updates which should have fixed it. Are you able to give any advice on this? Possibly, Joe, that sounds like an email to the ECDS mailbox. It sounds like it could be technical issues. It sounds like it could be something where TPP might need to have a look at that one for you, but we'll see if we can help you in any way. Yep. Peter Barr about professional registration identifier. In situations where we do not know the professional registration identifier, for example, a locum doctor or a nurse, can we submit a generic dummy code? Tom, I don't know if you want to pick that one.
Yeah, well,
I've got an answer on that one as well.
So yes, you do know their professional identifier, because otherwise you can't have them as a locum, because it's part of the basic documentation that you send across to be a locum. Is are you registered with the GMC, for instance? So as part of this, then I appreciate it needs to change the workflow, and so in some circumstances, what I'm aware of is that people use a series of cards which are mapped to generic locum or generic locum cards, and give them the cards to use the IT system, but then keep a record of which locums and their GMC numbers are kept separately, and those get mashed together as part of the process prior to submitting the data. So I think you must have a valid identifier for these patients, but it's quite possible that you won't necessarily do that at the point of care, if that makes sense.
So it sounds like it's one to pick up, before the extract and go, are there any, any patients or any records where we don't know this particular value, and fill it in at that point. Yeah, and no, please don't send generic or dummy values. With the data quality reports will be enhanced to pick those up, and we don't want.
Oh, we know. If we put that in and said yes, you do that, then that's basically all the data we would get, unfortunately. So absolutely agree with that. Thank you, Pete.
From Sue, the ECDS data model, yeah, we do have that. So just leave that one with us. Okay, Dave Forrest, how the SNOMED codes are mapping to the old codes don't appear correct in some cases. So Dave, I think the thing to do is please do check the latest version, which is 1.6.1 of the mapping file. Any that you think aren't correct, please do email us. We want to make sure that everything is right there. So please do send through. Yeah. And I think we're coming to the bottom of the list now. Paul Naylor, regarding mandatory/required within the injury section, why is the injury date time mandatory but the other fields only required? I'll just try and find that one now. Tom, do you have any? Yeah, okay, so the question is that these fields here, injury date and time, are mandatory. So what this is, this group is a required group, so you can make a submission without any data in this group. But what it means is if you do submit this group, you definitely do have to have an injury date and time. And actually everything else, yeah, is either required or optional. To be honest, off the top of my head, I'm not entirely sure why that choice was made. Tommy, do you have any of the background for that one?
I think it's that if you're saying that there was an injury, then you could make a reasonable stab at saying, was this injury, did it happen in the last hour? Was it 5 days ago? Even if you don't know the other details. And so I think that was the logic for putting that as mandatory. But I can quite see the why they might question that. So we can put that down to review with some of the data dictionary people, just to say, does that make sense, or do we need to review any of these? Yeah,
sure. And the final one I can see in my chat here that we haven't picked up is just a final comment from Lizzie, really, regarding what we were talking about submitting generic codes. So Lizzie saying that we do submit generic codes for some records where we can't keep the PAS config in line with staff details quickly enough. I guess I'm just wondering if that may be because you've got an automated submission, Lizzie, or something which is coming out, which you would then go back. So it would be interesting to know, Lizzie, if you do pick these up and resubmit the data when you to correct those values when you have worked them out.
I think there's a serious underlying issue here in that if we don't have details, because we know that there are some doctors who may be locums who make jump from hospital to hospital. And one of the reasons why they may move around so much is that possibly there's performance issues that don't get caught up with if they stay in any one place too long. And it's only by actually having this good quality data that we can see patterns which may occur across different hospitals. And so I would make a plea to say, please don't use generic codes. So, I understand the difficulties and that you may need to use them at the front line in order to make the IT work. But when you come to submitting this data, then these codes should be the codes which are mapped to that individual doctor or nurse. Thanks.
Thanks. So yeah, I realise we're a few minutes over, but we still have a few people have obviously had to drop off. But one final question which has come in here, hopefully probably the last one. Let's wrap it up here now with David Green's final question. What's the definition of a high intensity user, and how is that recorded? Mental health or physical health? Is there a definition of high intensity user? Tom or Bobby?
I think that's one for Bobby, isn't it? I don't know. Is he still on?
Not sure. Possibly got IT issues, but we'll try and answer that one, David, when we come out with the actual enhanced slides there covering the QA. So
sorry, Pete. Bobby put a message in the chat to say that his phone's died, so we'll pick that question up and forward it on to him after.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks a lot, Linda. So let's wrap it up there. Thank you very much, everybody, for your participation. Really well attended. Lots of engagement there, which is great to know. So yeah, thanks again for your interest in the webinar series. I hope that's been useful for you, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you again.
Thanks, everyone. Bye now.
Bye.